Cloudtts. Walking in the Footsteps of the Buddha. Author Thich Nhat Hanh. Book 1. Chapter 26. Water Rises 2. 7 days later, the Buddha was happy to find himself back in the forest of the Bodhi tree. He rested the night there. In the morning he surprised Svasti by the banks of the Naranja river. They sat for a long while along the shore before the Buddha told Svasti he should continue cutting the kusar grass needed by the buffaloes. He also helped Svasti cut some grass. Then, bidding Svasti goodbye, he walked to the village to beg. The next afternoon the village children came to visit the Buddha in the forest. All of Svasti's family was there. Sujata brought along all her friends. The children were very happy to see the Buddha again. They listened intently while he told them all that had happened to him in the past year. The Buddha promised Svasti that when Svasti was 20 years old, the Buddha would accept him as a bhikkhu. By that time, Svasti's sisters and brother would be old enough to care for themselves. The children told the Buddha that over the past few months a spiritual community led by a Brahmin had settled nearby. There were 500 devotees in all. They did not shave their heads like the bhikkhus. Instead, their hair was braided and then piled on top of their heads. They worshipped the god of fire. The Brahmin's name was Kassapa. He was deeply revered by all who met him. The following morning, the Buddha crossed the river and found Master Kassapa's community. His devotees lived in simple huts made from leafy branches and wore clothes made from the bark of trees. They did not enter the village to beg, but accepted offerings brought to them by the villagers. In addition, they raised their own animals for food and for making sacrifices. The Buddha stopped to speak with one of Kassapa's followers, who told him that Kassapa was deeply versed in the Vedas and lived a life of utmost virtue. Kassapa, he explained, also had 2 younger brothers who also led communities of fire worship. All 3 brothers held fire to be the original essence of the universe. Uruvela Kassapa was deeply loved by his 2 brothers, Noddi Kassapa, who lived with 300 devotees along the Naranja about a day's travel north, and Gaya Kassapa, who led 200 devotees in Gaya. Kassapa's disciple led the Buddha to his master's hut so that the Buddha could have an audience with him. Although Kassapa was no longer a young man, he was still quick and alert. When he saw the young teacher's extraordinary bearing, he felt immediately drawn to him and treated him as a special guest. Kassapa invited the Buddha to sit on a stump outside the hut, and the 2 enjoyed a long conversation. Kassapa marveled at how deeply versed the Buddha was in the Vedas. He was further astounded to discover that this young monk had grasped certain concepts in the Vedas which had eluded his own understanding. The Buddha helped explain certain of the most profound passages in the Atharvaveda and Rigveda scriptures, which Kassapa thought he had understood but discovered he had not yet truly grasped. Even more amazing was the young monk's knowledge of history, doctrine, and Brahmanic rituals. That noon the Buddha accepted Uruvela Kassapa's invitation to have a meal with him. The Buddha neatly folded his outer robe into a cushion and sat upon it, eating in mindful silence. So impressed was Uruvela Kassapa by the Buddha's serene and majestic countenance that he did not break the silence. That afternoon they continued their conversation. The Buddha asked, "Master Kassapa, can you explain to me how worshipping fire can lead a person to liberation?" Uruvela Kassapa did not answer right away. He knew very well that a superficial or ordinary response would not suffice for this extraordinary young monk. Kassapa began by explaining that fire was the basic essence of the universe. It had its source in Brahma. The main altar of the community, the fire sanctuary, always kept a sacred fire burning. That fire was itself the image of Brahma. The Atharvaveda scripture spoke of fire worship. Fire was life. Without fire there could be no life. Fire was light, warmth, and the source of the sun which enabled plants, animals, and people to live. It chased away dark shadows, conquered the cold, and brought joy and vitality to all beings. Food was made edible by fire, and thanks to fire, people were reunited with Brahma at death. Because fire was the source of life, it was Brahma himself. Agni, the god of fire, was one of the thousands of manifestations of Brahma. On the fire altar, Agni was portrayed as having two heads. One symbolized the daily uses of fire, and the other symbolized the fire of sacrifice and returning to the source of life. The fire worshippers performed 40 sacrificial rites. A devotee in their community had to observe precepts, practice austerities, and pray diligently in order to follow the path that would one day lead to liberation. Kassapa was strongly opposed to those Brahmins who used their position in society to acquire wealth and lose themselves in pursuit of sensual pleasures. He said that such Brahmins only performed rituals and recited the scriptures in order to become rich. Because of that, the reputation of the traditional Brahmanic path had become tarnished. The Buddha asked, "Master Kassapa, what do you think of those who regard water as the fundamental essence of life, who say that water is the element which purifies and returns people to union with Brahma?" Kassapa hesitated. He thought of the hundreds of thousands of people, right at that very moment, who were bathing themselves in the waters of Ganga and other sacred rivers to purify themselves. Gautama, water cannot really help one attain liberation. Water naturally flows down. Only fire rises. When we die, our body rises in smoke thanks to fire. Master Kassapa, that is not accurate. The white clouds floating above are also a form of water. Thus, water rises too. Indeed, smoke itself is no more than evaporated water. Both clouds and smoke will eventually return to a liquid state. All things, as I'm sure you know, move in cycles. But all things share one fundamental essence, and all things return to that one essence. Master Kassapa, all things depend on all other things for their existence. Take, for example, this leaf in my hand. Earth, water, heat, seed, tree, clouds, sun, time, space, all these elements have enabled this leaf to come into existence. If just one of these elements was missing, the leaf could not exist. All beings, organic and inorganic, rely on the law of dependent co-arising. The source of one thing is all things. Please consider this carefully. Don't you see that this leaf I am now holding in my hand is only here thanks to the interpenetration of all the phenomena in the universe, including your own awareness? It was already evening and beginning to grow dark. Kassapa invited the Buddha to sleep in his own hut. It was the first time he had ever made such an offer to anyone. But then he had never before met such an extraordinary monk. But the Buddha refused, saying that he had grown accustomed to sleeping alone at night. He said he would like to sleep in the fire sanctuary, if that would be all right. The Brahmin said, "For the past several days, an enormous snake has taken refuge in the fire sanctuary. All efforts to chase it away have failed. You must not sleep there, friend Gautama. It might be dangerous. We have even been holding our ceremonies outside for fear of the snake. Please sleep in my hut for your own safety." The Buddha replied, "Don't worry. I want to sleep in the fire sanctuary. I will not be in any danger." The Buddha recalled all the months he had practiced austerities in the wild jungles. Wild beasts passed him by without harming him. Sometimes while he sat in meditation, enormous snakes slithered in front of him. He knew that if you took care not to frighten such animals, they would not harm you. Seeing that the Buddha could not be dissuaded, Kassapa said, "If you wish to sleep in the fire sanctuary, you shall. You may sleep there as many nights as you like." That night the Buddha entered the fire sanctuary. On the central altar burned a great fire fed by many candles. On one side of the room was a pile of sandalwood logs, which were used for outdoor ceremonies. The Buddha guessed that the snake was probably curled up in the wood pile, so he sat in meditation on the other side of the room, using his folded robe as a cushion. He meditated deep into the night. Towards the end of his meditation, he saw the great snake coiled in the center of the room looking at him. The Buddha spoke softly to it, "Dear friend, return to the jungle for your own safety." The Buddha's voice was filled with love and understanding. The snake slowly uncoiled itself and crept out the door. The Buddha stretched out and fell asleep. When he awoke, brilliant moonlight poured through the window onto his sleeping place. The 18th day moon was unusually bright. He thought how pleasant it would be to do walking meditation beneath its light. He shook off the dust from his outer robe and put it on before walking out of the fire sanctuary. In the early hours of the morning, the sanctuary somehow caught on fire. Those who saw it first shouted to all the others. Everyone filled buckets with water at the river's edge, but to no avail. The water came too late to extinguish the raging fire. At last, the 500 devotees could do no more than stand and watch their sanctuary burn to the ground. Uruvela Kassapa stood with his followers. His heart was heavy with grief as he thought of the virtuous and talented young monk he had met only the day before. The young monk had surely perished in the fire. If only Gautama had consented to sleep in his hut, he would still be alive. Just as he was thinking this, the Buddha appeared. The Buddha had seen the fire from where he had been walking in the hills, and he had returned to see if he could be of any assistance. Overcome with relief and joy, Kassapa ran to the Buddha and grasped his hand. "Thank goodness, you are alive, friend Gautama. Nothing has happened to you. I am so happy." The Buddha placed his hands on the Brahmin's shoulders and smiled. "Thank you, my friend. Yes, I am all right." The Buddha knew that on that day Uruvela Kassapa would give a discourse, and that in addition to his own 500 disciples, at least 1,000 others would attend from the neighboring villages. The lecture would take place after the noon meal. Sensing that his presence during the lecture might cause Kassapa some discomfort, the Buddha went begging down in the village. After receiving food offerings, he walked to the lotus pond, ate his meal there, and spent the entire afternoon at that pleasant place. Late in the afternoon, Kassapa came looking for him. When he found him by the pond, he said, "Friend Gautama, we waited for you at the noon meal, but you never appeared. Why didn't you join us?" The Buddha responded that he had wished to be absent during the lecture. "Why did you not wish to attend the lecture?" asked Uruvela Kassapa. The Buddha only smiled gently. The Brahmin did not say anything else. He knew that the young monk had read his thoughts. How tactful and considerate Gautama was! They sat by the lotus pond and conversed. Kassapa said, "Yesterday you said that the presence of a leaf resulted from the coming together of many different conditions. You said that humans, too, exist only because of the coming together of many other conditions. But when all these conditions cease to be, where does the self go?" The Buddha answered, "For a long time humans have been trapped by the concept of Atman, the concept of a separate and eternal self. We have believed that when our body dies, this self continues to exist and seeks union with its source, which is Brahma. But, friend Kassapa, that is a fundamental misunderstanding which has caused countless generations to go astray. You should know, friend Kassapa, that all things exist because of interdependence, and all things cease to be because of interdependence. This is because that is. This is not because that is not. This is born because that is born. This dies because that dies. This is the wonderful law of dependent co-arising, which I have discovered in my meditation. In truth, there is nothing which is separate and eternal. There is no self, whether a higher or a lower self. Kassapa, have you ever meditated on your body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness? A person is made up of these 5 aggregates. They are continuously changing rivers in which one cannot find even one permanent element. Uruvela Kassapa remained silent for a long moment. Then he asked, "Could one say then that you teach the doctrine of non-being?" The Buddha smiled and shook his head. No. The concept of non-being is one narrow view among a whole forest of narrow views. The concept of non-being is just as false as the concept of a separate, permanent self. Kassapa, look at the surface of this lotus pond. I do not say that the water and lotus do not exist. I only say that the water and the lotus arise thanks to the presence and interpenetration of all other elements, none of which are separate or permanent. Kassapa lifted his head and looked into the Buddha's eyes. If there is no self, no Atman, why should one practice a spiritual path in order to attain liberation? Who will be liberated? The Buddha looked deeply into the eyes of his Brahmana friend. His gaze was as radiant as the sun and as gentle as the soft moonlight. He smiled and said, Kassapa, look for the answer within yourself. They returned together to Kassapa's community. Uravela Kassapa insisted on giving the Buddha his hut for the night, and went to sleep himself in the hut of one of his senior disciples. The Buddha could see how deeply Kassapa's disciples revered their teacher. Chapter 27. All dharmas are on fire. Every morning Kassapa brought the Buddha some food, and so the Buddha did not need to go begging in the village. After his daily meal, he walked alone on forest paths or down to the lotus pond. In the later afternoons, Kassapa would join him for discussion beneath the trees or beside the pond. The more time he spent with the Buddha, the more Kassapa understood how wise and virtuous the Buddha was. One night it rained so heavily that by morning the Naranja river had overflowed its banks. Nearby fields and dwellings were quickly submerged by floodwaters. Boats desperately went out to try to rescue people. Kassapa's community was able to climb to higher land in time, but no one could find Gautama. Kassapa sent several boats to look for him. At last he was found standing on a distant hill. The water subsided as quickly as it had risen. The next morning the Buddha took his begging bowl and went down into the village to see how the villagers had fared in the flood. Luckily no one had drowned. The people told the Buddha that because they did not own many possessions in the first place, the flood had not robbed them of much. Kassapa's disciples began to rebuild the fire sanctuary, which had been destroyed by fire, and to rebuild their huts washed away by the flood. One afternoon, while the Buddha and Kassapa stood along the banks of the Naranja, Kassapa said, Gautama, the other day you spoke about the meditation on one's body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. I have been practicing that meditation, and I have begun to understand how one's feelings and perceptions determine the quality of one's life. I also see that there is no permanent element to be found in any of the 5 rivers. I can even see that the belief in a separate self is false. But I still don't understand why one should follow a spiritual path if there is no self. Who is there to be liberated? The Buddha asked, Kassapa, do you accept that suffering is a truth? Yes, Gautama, I accept that suffering is a truth. Do you agree that suffering has causes? Yes, I accept that suffering has causes. Kassapa, when the causes of suffering are present, suffering is present. When the causes of suffering are removed, suffering is also removed. Yes, I see that when the causes of suffering are removed, suffering itself is removed. The cause of suffering is ignorance, a false way of looking at reality. Thinking the impermanent is permanent, that is ignorance. Thinking there is a self when there is not, that is ignorance. From ignorance is born greed, anger, fear, jealousy, and countless other sufferings. The path of liberation is the path of looking deeply at things in order to truly realize the nature of impermanence, the absence of a separate self, and the interdependence of all things. This path is the path which overcomes ignorance. Once ignorance is overcome, suffering is transcended. That is true liberation. There is no need for a self for there to be liberation. Uruvela Kassapa sat silently for a moment and then said, Gautama, I know you speak only from your own direct experience. Your words do not simply express concepts. You have said that liberation can only be attained through the efforts of meditation, by looking deeply at things. Do you think that all ceremonies, rituals, and prayers are useless? The Buddha pointed to the other side of the river and said, Kassapa, if a person wants to cross to the other shore, what should he do? If the water is shallow enough, he can wade across. Otherwise, he will have to swim or row a boat across. I agree. But what if he is unwilling to wade, swim, or row a boat? What if he just stands on this side of the river and prays to the other shore to come to him? What would you think of such a man? I would say he was being quite foolish. Just so, Kassapa. If one doesn't overcome ignorance and mental obstructions, one cannot cross to the other side to liberation, even if one spends one's whole life praying. Suddenly Kassapa burst into tears and prostrated himself before the Buddha's feet. Gautama, I have wasted more than half my life. Please accept me as your disciple and give me the chance to study and practice the way of liberation with you. The Buddha helped Kassapa stand back up and said, I would not hesitate to accept you as my disciple, but what of your 500 devotees? Who will guide them if you leave? Kassapa answered, Gautama, give me a chance to speak with them this morning. Tomorrow afternoon I will let you know of my decision. The Buddha said, the children in Uruvela village call me the Buddha. Kassapa was surprised. That means the awakened one, doesn't it? I will call you the same. The next morning, the Buddha went begging in Uruvela village. Afterwards, he went to the lotus pond to sit. Late that afternoon, Kassapa came looking for him. He told the Buddha that all 500 of his devotees agreed to become disciples under the Buddha's guidance. The next day, Uruvela and all his followers shaved their heads and beards, and threw the locks of hair into the Niranjara river along with all the liturgical objects they had used for fire worship. They bowed before the Buddha and recited 3 times, "I take refuge in the Buddha, the one who shows me the way in this life. I take refuge in the Dharma, the way of understanding and love. I take refuge in the Sangha, the community that lives in harmony and awareness." Their recitation of the 3 refuges echoed throughout the forest. When the ordination was completed, the Buddha spoke to the new bhikkhus about the 4 noble truths and how to observe one's breath, body, and mind. He showed them how to beg for food and how to eat in silence. He asked them to release all the animals they had once raised for food and sacrifices. That afternoon the Buddha met with Kassapa and 10 of Kassapa's senior students to teach them the fundamentals of the way of awakening as well as to discuss how to best organize the Sangha. Kassapa was a talented organizer and leader, and, with the Buddha, he assigned capable senior students to train the younger bhikkhus, just as the Buddha had done in Isipatana. The next day Noddy Kassapa, Uruvela Kassapa's younger brother, arrived with his disciples in a state of shock. The day before, he and his 300 devotees who lived downstream from Uruvela had seen hundreds of braids and liturgical objects floating in the river, and they feared some terrible catastrophe had befallen the community of his elder brother. When Noddy Kassapa reached Uruvela, it was the hour of begging, and so he was unable to find anyone. His worst fears seemed to be confirmed. But slowly bhikkhus began to return from begging, and they explained how they had all taken vows to follow a monk named Gautama. Uruvela Kassapa returned from begging with the Buddha and was most happy to see his younger brother. He invited him for a walk in the forest. They were gone for a good length of time, and when they returned, Noddy Kassapa announced that he and his 300 devotees would also take refuge in the Buddha. Both brothers agreed to send someone to summon their brother, Gaya Kassapa. Thus, in the space of only 7 days, the 200 devotees of Gaya Kassapa were also ordained as bhikkhus. The Kassapa brothers were well known for their brotherly love and sharing of common ideals. Together they became deeply devoted students of the Buddha. One day, after all the bhikkhus had returned from begging, the Buddha summoned them to gather on the slopes of the mountain in Gaya. 900 bhikkhus ate in silence with the Buddha and the 3 Kassapa brothers. When they were finished eating, they all turned their gaze to the Buddha. Sitting serenely upon a large rock, the Buddha began to speak, "Bhikkhus, all dharmas are on fire." "What is on fire?" "The 6 sense organs, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body and mind, are all on fire. The 6 objects of the senses, form, sound, smell, taste, touch, and objects of mind, are all on fire. The 6 consciousnesses, sight, hearing, smell, taste, feeling, and thought, are all on fire. They are burning from the flames of desire, hatred, and illusion. They are burning from the flames of birth, old age, sickness, and death, and from the flames of pain, anxiety, frustration, worry, fear, and despair. Bhikkhus, every feeling is burning, whether it is an unpleasant, pleasant, or neutral feeling. Feelings arise and are conditioned by the sense organs, objects of the sense organs, and the sense consciousnesses. Feelings are burning from the flames of desire, hatred, and illusion. Feelings are burning from the flames of birth, old age, sickness, and death, and from the flames of pain, anxiety, frustration, worry, fear, and despair. Bhikkhus, do not allow yourselves to be consumed by the flames of desire, hatred, and illusion. See the impermanent and interdependent nature of all dharmas in order not to be enslaved by the cycle of birth and death created by the sense organs, objects of the senses, and the sense consciousnesses. 900 bhikkhus listened intently. Each man was deeply moved. They were happy to know they had found the path that taught how to look deeply in order to attain liberation. Faith welled in the heart of every bhikkhu there. The Buddha remained in Gaya for 3 months to teach the new bhikkhus, and the bhikkhus made great progress. The Kassapa brothers were talented assistants to the Buddha, and they helped him guide and teach the Sangha. Chapter 28. Palm Forest. The morning had arrived for the Buddha to depart from Gaya and make his way to Rajagaha. Uruvela Kassapa asked the Buddha to allow the entire Sangha to accompany him. The Buddha was reluctant, but Kassapa explained how easily 900 bhikkhus could travel together. There would be many forests around Rajagaha where the bhikkhus could dwell. They could beg in the many villages there, as well as in the capital city itself, making contact with many local people. Moreover, added Kassapa, the number of bhikkhus was now too large for the population of Gaya to support. Everything would be easier in Rajagaha. Seeing how knowledgeable Uruvela Kassapa was about the situation in Magadha, the Buddha agreed to let the 900 bhikkhus join him. The Kassapa brothers divided the Sangha into 36 groups of 25 bhikkhus. Each group was led by a senior student. This arrangement allowed the bhikkhus to make ever greater progress on the path. 10 days were needed for them all to reach Rajagaha. Each morning, they begged in small villages and ate silently in the forests or fields. When they finished eating, they began to walk again, traveling in their own small groups. The sight of the bhikkhus walking quietly and slowly made a deep impression on all who saw them. When they neared Rajagaha, Uruvela Kassapa led them to Palm Forest, where the Supathita temple was located. Palm Forest was only 2 miles south of the capital. The next morning the bhikkhus took their bowls and went begging in the city. They walked single file in their small groups, taking calm, slow steps. They held their bowls serenely while their eyes looked straight ahead. Following the Buddha's instructions, they stood before each house without discriminating whether it belonged to rich or poor. If no one appeared after a few moments, they moved on to the next house. While silently waiting for food offerings to be made, they mindfully observed their breath. When they received a food offering, they bowed in thanks. They never made any comments about whether the food looked good or bad. Sometimes the layperson making the offering asked the bhikkhu a few questions about the Dharma, and the bhikkhu answered thoughtfully to the best of his ability. The bhikkhu explained that he belonged to the Sangha of Gautama the Buddha. He would speak about the Four Noble Truths, the 5 precepts for the laity, and the Noble Eightfold Path. The bhikkhus always returned to Palm Forest by noon to share their meal in silence before listening to a discourse on the Dharma given by the Buddha. Afternoons and evenings were reserved for meditation practice. Thus, after the noon hour, no one in the city saw the saffron-robed bhikkhus. By the end of 2 weeks, most of the city was aware of the presence of the Buddha's Sangha. On cool afternoons, many laypersons came to Palm Forest to meet the Buddha and to learn about the way of awakening. Before the Buddha had had a chance to visit his friend, the young king Senior Bimbisara had already learned of the Buddha's presence. Sure that this new teacher was the same young monk he had met on the mountain, he mounted his carriage and ordered it driven to Palm Forest. Many other carriages followed his, for he had invited over 100 highly regarded Brahmana teachers and intellectuals to join him. When they reached the edge of the forest, the king stepped out of his carriage, accompanied by the queen and their son, Prince Ajatasattu. When the Buddha was informed of the king's arrival, he and Uravela Kassapa personally went out to greet him and all his guests. All the bhikkhus were seated in great circles on the earth waiting to hear the Buddha's Dharma talk. The Buddha invited the king, queen, prince, and other guests to be seated, too. King Bimbisara introduced as many of the guests as he could remember names, but sometimes had to ask a Brahmin to introduce himself. Among the guests were many scholars well versed in the Vedas and belonging to many different schools of religious thought. Chapter 29. Dependent Co-arising. Throughout the following weeks, many seekers came to the Buddha and asked to be ordained as bhikkhus. Many of them were highly educated young men from wealthy families. The Buddha's senior students performed the ordination ceremonies and gave the new bhikkhus basic instruction in the practice. Other young people, women as well as men, came to Palm Forest and took the 3 refuges. One day Kondana gave the 3 refuges to a gathering of nearly 300 young people. After the ceremony, he spoke to them about the 3 precious gems, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha is the awakened one. An awakened person sees the nature of life and the cosmos. Because of that, an awakened person is not bound by illusion, fear, anger, or desire. An awakened person is a free person, filled with peace and joy, love and understanding. Master Gautama, our teacher, is a completely awakened person. He shows us the way in this life so that we may overcome forgetfulness and become awakened ourselves. Every one of us contains Buddha nature. We can all become a Buddha. Buddha nature is the capacity to awaken and transcend all ignorance. If we practice the way of awareness, our Buddha nature will shine more brightly every day until one day we, too, shall attain total freedom, peace, and joy. We must each find the Buddha within our own heart. The Buddha is the first precious gem. The Dharma is the path which leads to awakening. It is the path which the Buddha teaches, the path which helps us to transcend the prisons of ignorance, anger, fear, and desire. This path leads to freedom, peace, and joy. It enables us to love and understand all others. Understanding and love are the 2 most beautiful fruits of the path of awakening. The Dharma is the second precious gem. The Sangha is the community of persons practicing the way of awakening, those who travel this path together. If you want to practice the way of liberation, it is important to have a community to practice with. If you are all alone, difficulties along the path may hinder your realization of awakening. It is important to take refuge in the Sangha, whether you are an ordained bhikkhu or a lay person. The Sangha is the 3rd precious gem. Young people, today you have taken refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. With the support of these refuges, you will not wander aimlessly, but will be able to make real progress on the path of enlightenment. It has been 2 years since I took refuge in the 3 gems myself. Today you have vowed to travel the same path. Let us rejoice together that we have taken refuge in the 3 precious gems. Of course, these gems have been present in our own hearts from beginningless time. Together we will practice the way of liberation to allow these 3 gems to shine from within us. The young people were greatly encouraged by Kondana's words. They all felt a new source of vitality surge within their hearts. During those same days, the Buddha received 2 exceptional new disciples, Sariputta and Moggallana, into his Sangha of Bhikkhus. They were both disciples of the famous ascetic Sanjaya, who lived in Rajagaha. Sanjaya's devotees were called Parivrajakaas. Sariputta and Moggallana were close friends, respected for their intelligence and open-mindedness. They had promised each other that whoever attained the Great Way first would immediately inform the other. One day Sariputta saw the Bhikkhu Assaji begging in Rajagaha, and he was immediately drawn by Assaji's relaxed and serene bearing. Sariputta thought to himself, "This appears to be someone who has attained the way." I knew such persons could be found. I will ask him who his teacher is and what his teaching is." Sariputta quickened his pace to catch up with Assaji, but then stopped himself, not wanting to disturb the bhikkhu while he was silently begging from house to house. Sariputta resolved to wait until Assaji was finished begging before approaching him. Without making himself noticed, Sariputta followed Assaji. When Assaji's bowl was filled with offerings and he turned to leave the city, Sariputta joined his palms in respectful greeting and said, "Monk, you radiate such peace and calm. Your virtue and understanding shine in the way you walk, in the expression on your face, and in your every gesture. Please allow me to ask who your teacher is and at what practice center you reside. What methods does your teacher teach?" Assaji looked at Sariputta for a moment and then smiled in a most friendly manner. He answered, "I study and practice under the guidance of the Master Gautama of the Sakya clan, who is known as the Buddha. He is presently dwelling near Supathita Temple in Palm Forest." Sariputta's eyes brightened. "What is his teaching? Can you share it with me? The Buddha's teaching is deep and lovely. I have not grasped it fully yet. You should come and receive the teachings directly from the Buddha." But Sariputta implored Assaji, "Please, can't you share with me even a few words of the Buddha's teaching? It would be so precious to me. I will come for more teaching later." Assaji smiled and then recited a short gatha. From interdependent origins, all things arise, and all things pass away. So teaches the perfectly enlightened one. Sariputta suddenly felt his heart open as though it were being flooded by bright light. A flawless glimpse of true Dharma flashed before him. He bowed to Assaji and quickly ran to seek his friend Moggallana. When Moggallana saw Sariputta's radiant face, he asked, "My brother, what has made you so happy? Can you have found the true path? Please tell me, brother." Sariputta related what had just happened. When he recited the gatha for Moggallana to hear, Moggallana also felt a sudden flash of light illuminate his heart and mind. Suddenly he saw the universe as an interconnected net. This was because that was, this arose because that arose, this was not because that was not, this passed away because that passed away. The belief in a creator of all things vanished in this understanding of dependent co-arising. He now understood how one could cut through the endless cycle of birth and death. The door of liberation opened before him. Moggallana said, "Brother, we must go to the Buddha at once. He is the teacher we have been waiting for." Sariputta agreed, but reminded him, "What of the 250 Parivrajaka brothers who have long placed their faith and trust in us as elder brothers of the community? We can't just abandon them. We must go and inform them of our decision first." The two friends made their way to the Parivrajaka main gathering place and explained to their fellow practitioners their decision to leave the community and become disciples of the Buddha. When the Parivrjakas heard that Sariputta and Moggallana were about to leave them, they were grieved. The community would not be the same without these two elder brothers. And so, they all expressed their desire to follow them and become disciples of the Buddha, too. Sariputta and Moggallana went to Master Sanjaya and told him of the decision of the community. He entreated them to stay, saying, "If you remain here, I will transfer the leadership of the community to you both." He said this 3 times, but Sariputta and Moggallana had made up their minds. They said, "Respected Master, we embarked on the spiritual path in order to find liberation, and not to become religious leaders. If we do not know the true path, how can we lead others? We must seek out the Master Gautama, for he has attained the path we have long sought for." Sariputta and Moggallana prostrated themselves before Sanjaya and then departed, followed by the other Parivrajaka's. They walked to Palm Forest, where they all prostrated before the Buddha and asked to be ordained. The Buddha spoke to them about the 4 noble truths and accepted them as bhikkhus in his Sangha. After the ordination ceremony, the number of bhikkhus in Palm Grove numbered 1,250.